Southwest Fire Academy was established in 2015 as a response to the recognized need for quality, safe, and affordable fire and rescue training in Ontario. This is not your average fire college. SFA has high standards for their students, and it is their mission to teach and produce qualified, ambitious firefighters who are prepared to work hard to serve their communities. This is not a diploma mill. This is where you can learn strategic, aggressive firefighting from passionate, intelligent instructors who never forget why they were made to do this job. SFA is an accredited private career college that is regulated by the Ministry of Training, colleges, and universities, with a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Fire Marshal. This means that SFA is an approved training provider with the OFM, and the programs are recognized in Ontario. Check out their pre-service and expanding selection of course offerings at southwestfireacademy.ca. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 109 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. Martin Luther King. When we refer to experience in this job, we are usually referring to years on, which we understand now as a misnomer. Experiences within those years seems more accurate, but even that can be a misleading numbers game that solely focuses on types and numbers of emergency calls you've attended. What is much more interesting and telling is the growth experiences that you've had, prior to and on and off the job. Those take awareness of what happened around you and within you. And that takes research, conversations, and reflection, and hopefully from that, learning and change. Here's my chat with Matt and Ryan of the Growth Experience. Hey, Matt.
Hey.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good.
Got a beauty day to do this inside, but that's okay, right?
Yeah, short term, man, and we'll get back out and enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. You're steering, so we're all yours.
Yeah, so I think the best place to start would just be a bit of background on both of you and how you ended up getting together and creating the Growth Experience. Matt, if you want to kick us off.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you, Scott, for having us on here to share our story of our journey towards this collaborative entity that is the Growth Experience. The background, about 6-7 years ago, I was a Toronto police officer for the better part of 13 years. And living in that world, I experienced a version of myself that was, I would say, detached from this sense of reality that I currently exist in. You know, I was living in a pretty dark existence. I was navigating my life in a way that was generally guided by a means of escape. You know, I was heavily into consumptive behavior. You know, I was a pretty heavy drinker. I felt like I navigated my way into the police world for that exact purpose. You know, it was to find a next layer, level up in escapism. And it was to, numb myself out from acknowledging any pain and suffering that I was experiencing internally. I'm not even being able to necessarily name it per se, but that escapism way of being allowed me to not tap into that part of myself. It needed some healing and needed a lot of nurturing and a lot of, self-care, self-love that I wasn't able to find myself capable of giving to myself.
It's interesting that you were saying how you navigated into it already with this, whether you're conscious of it or not, that it was there. Because I've said numerous times that we don't come into the emergency services or anything as a blank slate. Or sometimes there's this misnomer where you get a brand new bunch of rookies, they're completely blank slates, and then the job then affects them beyond that. So maybe just give me a bit more detail on your mindset entering into and the why and how you thought about the world and yourself. Was there any distinct shift during your work that you felt, and then the shift out? Give me a snapshot of your mindset pre, during, and then that'll lead us to after.
I believe you mentioned whether it's conscious or not. I think that version of me, as I stepped into that world, was subconsciously seeking this existential means to not be inside self, not be in those parts of me that hurt. And again, subconsciously, it's like, what can I do in this upregulated state to stay external, living in that external world? Why I was so drawn to it, not necessarily in conscious choice, but drawn to it in the sense of, I can live in that high adrenaline state. I can live in danger. I can live in all those scenarios that will hit those chemical markers that will just keep me up here and not inside here. And, the culture of policing also I knew would welcome my consumptive personality. There's lots of people in that world that choose to navigate, their way of being through drinking and, choosing that way of taking care of themselves. And I knew I'd be received. As I started to navigate my career as a police officer, I was so in it that I don't think I quite realized until a massive life quake in 2018, where, a lot of my truths were exposed, the way that I was covering up every part of me that I didn't want anyone to know about. My ex-wife now at the time found out a lot of things that caused a lot of hurt. And it sucked me out of this vortex of darkness of once on the outside, able to look back in and go, holy cow, that's what was going on there. That is, man, you, unbeknownst to self, was literally living like an alternate existence. I had created this persona that was going to be safe, well, metaphorically safe, from having to, again, give any attention to this actual soulful vessel of a human that was actually me, and the pain that I caused. And then I was able to take that experience that my ex-wife gifted me to be able to turn around and look at how I was showing up in the world, and brought me to a place where I then realized that I didn't want to show up like that anymore. I could handle hurting myself, even though it was somewhat of a subconscious choice. But to now realize that that also hurt others was something that really gave me pause to turn and reflect and say, hey, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore, and I won't do this anymore. And like I say, it was a gift because it put a totally different perspective and lens on my purpose in the world and how I was supposed to show up as a person of service.
Now, how were you able to, because a lot of people might have that same epiphany, yet they're stuck, or we've heard the golden handcuffs as an example, right? You're stuck in the career you're in. So how were you able to, in your situation, practically and mentally, to detach yourself from that? How did that work?
Well, so I went on a stress leave and I went into a treatment program, just to give a bit of a backstory to the actual exit from policing. I went into a treatment program and I gained a lot of clarity through, obviously removing alcohol from the equation, resetting my foundational balance of self, not having that alcohol and the behaviors of the police world as part of that foundation. So when I then started to heal or look at self and wanting to shift who I was, it was like a constant audit that was going on. It was like, okay, I'm in the WSIB process, the program that is, doing the therapeutic markers and check-ins with the entities that are part of that reintegration back into the police world. And over that 2.5, 3 years, there was just this audit going on, and there was an opportunity to possibly lateral in with the OPP, and went to a but I sat down with the unit commander at a local detachment, spent a day with the OPP up here in the Collingwood area. And it was just that day, it was like another gift. And it was the culture. I knew I could police, I knew you could drop me into an investigation and probably be able to navigate that in a healthy way. What I experienced was this culture of policing didn't feel right. Sort of a microcosm of what was Toronto policing, this really small detachment with far fewer people, far fewer calls. What I heard around me, what the dialogue was, all the negativity, the dark sort of conversations, it was just like, it's no different here than it is in Toronto. And that's not to speak to the people. I think that there's some amazing people. I don't want to be misconstrued in respect to, this speaking poorly about the humans in it. It's a collective energy of the police world that is at a place where it just didn't feel like it was a place that I could heal and become the version of the person I want to be, with constant exposure to that culture. And I didn't see how I could inject change from within. So I made a decision that I had to leave. I probably could have systemically stayed on WSIB for many more years, but morally and consciously, I was like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to go back because I just don't feel like my soul's supposed to be in that space, but I still want to help people. So I'm going to leave. And that's how that transition out went, from spiritual reflection and audit of all things encompassed in it.
I think some pieces we can touch on coming up around identity and maybe how shame and guilt sometimes prevent us from moving forward. But let's bring Ryan in. So Ryan, why don't you chat about your background and maybe speak on what resonated between you and Matt that got you connected, and then let's bring us to the present moment.
Yeah, great. Again, thank you, Scott, for having both Matt and I on the show. Been listening to your show for a number of years now. Very inspiring. And, we've had some great chats as well about the world of podcasts, and I've been bending your ear about getting something going on my own, which I am still working on. But as we know, life shows up and we got to take care of those who are closest before we take on these fun projects. So my story is a bit different than Matt's. I did not work in the world of frontline work. I grew up in a small town, Midland, 2 hours north of Toronto. My parents separated. It was in grade 3, grade 4. Mom is an alcoholic, so she's 32 years sober today. And dad, he was addicted to pain meds. So that's a whole array of meds that are used for pain. Dad went through many car accidents, was attacked by a dog at one point in his life. So Dad had a lot of pain physically and mentally as well. So I watched my father essentially use morphine patches to numb out. And my mother was an alcoholic, so I was holding my mother's head over the toilet at 12 years old. I had to grow up pretty quick. I felt like part of my youth was taken, but I've reworded it. That's what I was called to do then. So from a young age, I have felt I've got this ability to serve as well, whether it be my community, my family, just because I've been doing it for so long. And I still do today, care for my mother because she had a car accident and has struggled with what's called conversion disorder, which is a pseudo seizure. And then mix alcoholism with that, and the brain is just not what it was in its sharper days. I love my mother dearly. My father, I lost him in 2020 to pancreatic cancer. I'm a father of 2 beautiful girls, 14 and 10, Gigi and Everly. And my partner in my life is Brooke Johnson. Met her at the beginning of the pandemic. But back to my parents and kind of how I went down this road of service, if you will. After Dad passed, a lot of things showed up through grieving and through pain and through trauma and the loss of a parent. I had no idea what that looked like. I've grown a lot through it. Prior to Dad passing away, I worked as a residential youth counselor down in the Shelburne area. It was a school called Pine River Institute. And so I was there essentially as a mentor for kids to help them find hope, because a lot of these kids were either addicted to alcohol, drugs, even video games and phones, any type of addiction. This school would take kids in. And my job was to lift their spirits, take them on adventures, play music with them. So I feel like part of my journey and where I landed today is definitely part of the threads of the work that I've done over the years. Did a lot of coaching through sports, coached trampoline for a whole bunch of years to support my ski background. I was a competitive skier, had the opportunity to travel the world. When I returned, I went to school for business marketing, got into events, and then the world of skiing called me back to coach. And so I had the opportunity to build freestyle ski programs here at our local ridge, Alpine Ski Club and Craigleith. And when the pandemic hit, I decided that I would take a pause on that to serve my family. Coached in the mountain bike world for a number of years, still do from time to time. And then met Matt. Matt, was it 2 years ago we met?
Sounds about right.
So Matt and I met at the Foundry here in Collingwood, a co-op workspace. I just finished recording a podcast and met Matt, and we learned that we were in the same men's circle with Everlove Yoga Studio here in town. So as we started chatting, my last name is Markham. Matt grew up in Markham, and I was wearing my Markham Works hat, my business name, when I met him. And so that was where we originally kind of connected. Ever since I met Matt, I knew that he was a kindred spirit and that he had a lot of depth to him as a men's coach. and as an ex-police officer and an Irishman. We're both Irish, so we have that in common too. So when Matt and I met, joined a men's circle with our other business partner, Nathan McCrosker, who is from Australia, who lives here in Ontario in Wabasheen. The three of us joined this men's circle, and after circle, we were meeting for coffee and came up with this idea of creating men's events and men's retreats to give men a space to connect differently than we have for a long time, I guess. But how we used to connect thousands of years ago, we used to protect our communities, hunt for our food, and gather and connect to lift each other up. And it's something that we're bringing back to today, creating these spaces where men have the opportunity to step into a space, knowing that they're dry events and that they can connect around fire, play some pretty cool games, and eat delicious food together. And we've added some other parts to these events as well. We're almost a year into this project, company. What do you say, Matt?
The collective growth experience.
We are collective growth experience. So circling back to my reason, my why as to why I feel called to helping other men, helping other humans. I think the loss of my dad, working with kids who struggled with addiction. All of these pieces, when I stepped into that space, I felt that there's something special that's there, and I have something to offer in sharing my own experience.
So I think for people listening that haven't been to a collective men's event, and even when you're speaking about what might happen at that event, we're getting together, we're sitting around the campfire, maybe play some games together, eating some good food, we're chatting. A lot of people might think, well, why can't I just hang out with my friends and do that? What's the difference? And I was thinking about it before I came on with you guys, and to me, it's really about intention, right? So how often do you sit around with your friends or even doing those same things, but you don't necessarily have the intention to take time to really talk? And if you already do that with your friends and you have this balance of deeper talks and sometimes some more lighter times, like you don't need to be in the depths with each other all the time, but there is benefit to that. And if you don't have that with the circle you're in or the friends you have, to me, it's about intention, right? You know, coming to this circle of people that's what the intention is. So you know that you're in a place where you can speak differently and experience something together differently. So maybe just expand on that about how important intention is versus just hanging out with your buddies.
Even as you started to deliver that question, Scott, like intention was exactly what was starting to come up in the answer I was already formulating before you finished. I think that there's lots of healthy men out there that are connecting in very healthy ways that aren't, necessarily stepping into a men's circle or a men's retreat or whatever. I think there's lots of very healthy men out there navigating their life in a way that is going to benefit themselves and all those humans around them. But I think the growth experience, our lived experience, and I'll speak, in the hour, is because we've, as Ryan sort of alluded to earlier, we've both been highly exposed to, I know it's a bit of a trendy term, but this toxic masculine environments, that I experienced in policing, and, Ryan can speak further to, but areas of extreme sports and some of those spaces that can become I'll continue to use the term toxic environment of connection where, there is an autopilot way of the men seem to show up in those spaces, in the conversations that are had. And I don't think that, for the most part, and I won't speak it in an all-encompassing way, but for the most part, it's not elevating each other up. It's actually, at least in my experience in the police world, a lot of the conversations were the opposite. Let's just drag each other through this fucking dark depth of hell that is this job. And then all we did was talk about it. And if what you say matters so much, which I believe does, what you say to yourself, what you say to others, what you put out into the world matters so much, let's create a container that is doing the opposite, where intention is to elevate each other, to not necessarily have deep, intensive conversations, but the intention behind the conversations is to elevate self and those around you. Talk about meaningful, purposeful things, things that are going to help each other navigate difficult moments, help celebrate moments. What can we inject into these experiences that collectively elevate and help each other have a growth experience? And Ryan alluded to this very primal way of being where men traditionally, up until very recently, some of the modalities that men connected and helped each other heal and grow from were whatever the world was before technology took over. Your day existed of working hard, nourishing your body, restoring so you could work hard again the next day, and also having some playfulness and moments of joy within all that. So what can we do? So the Men in the Backyard container, which isn't the only experience that we offer, but it is the most commonly presented one, and we do it monthly, has those things. It's like, let's get men together. Let's wrap them around a fire. Let's put in some intentional conversation about some things that we can support each other in. Again, celebrations or difficult moments. Let's share a meal together. Then let's get in the sauna, get in the cold plunge, restore these vessels back to a nice grounded state and play some games. Like, let's laugh. Let's have some fun together as well.
Ryan, what comes up for you when you're listening to Matt talk about it, and what would you add on to it?
Yeah, I'd say that Matt spoke very well to that. Our events are quite unique in the sense that we do set intention. There's a stereotype, I think, in the world today when it comes to men stepping into these events versus women. And that's okay. I mean, my answer to these, folks who are like, oh, this must be a soft event, it's not for me. I also worked in the blue collar world of construction. And as Matt was saying, like, I did a lot of extreme sports, and there isn't that curiosity that we encourage in our spaces. Is we encourage to show up, be curious, non-judgmental, and try to have a little bit of fun while you're at these events. We will put you through some uncomfortable parts of the day. Like the cold plunge is an uncomfortable part of the day if you don't have experience with it. We have some men that come and they love cold plunging, so it's the best part of their day. But these short containers, so a short day, it's a half a day. We do typically like a 12 to 5 day, and it's amazing what we hear back from men who step into these containers. Men who had a label for what the growth experience was or the Men in the Backyard was, and then leaving feeling lighter, feeling restored. They ate Nathan's delicious food, and then maybe made a couple new buddies that they can grab a coffee with, or networking happens at our events all the time because we have a lot of entrepreneurs who step in. We also have a lot of frontline workers that are stepping into the growth experience events because I feel that based on your line of work, that you have an awareness that we have to do the work. We have to restore our body, whether it's seeing a massage therapist or a chiropractor. We need to go see therapists and unload everything that we carry. And we need to have healthy ways to connect with other humans so that we can go out and do the work that we do. And I feel that what we're offering is a safe space for frontline workers to come in, connect with other humans, and see that their situation or their life isn't so unique, that there's a lot of other people that are struggling with similar pieces in their life. Whether you're a father or you're a partner to someone, like, we are all facing very similar struggles in our life. And when we actually come together, remove alcohol from the conversation, it's amazing how deep we can actually go and understand that, oh shit, you're struggling too, or you've been through struggle and now you're out on the other side and you're willing to share tools with those who are working on climbing back up that mountain. That's what these events are. These events are the opportunity to get inspired, to continue to grow and do that self-work that you may want to call in for yourself.
At the Firehouse Tribune, their mission is simple: to empower firefighters and first responders with the knowledge, resources, and inspiration they need to perform at their best on the job while living a meaningful life off the job. Whether it's through insightful articles, engaging podcasts, or real-world training courses, everything they offer is built around 3 core principles. Inform, with expert advice, actionable tactics, and the latest in tools and technology. Inspire, by sharing stories of resilience, leadership, and the human side of the job. And fostering excellence, by encouraging continuous learning, growth, and leadership development at every level. They're more than just a platform. They're a community, and they're here to help you become the best well-rounded firefighter on and off the fireground. Visit thefirehousetribune.com to explore the latest content and see how they're making a difference. one firefighter at a time. The Firehouse Tribune. Work hard, stay safe, live inspired. Matt, you mentioned the word upregulated when you were talking before. I think that's something we need to focus on, where it's not wrong to be upregulated. That's an important part of being human. But the problem is staying upregulated, not knowing how to downregulate. So people are really, really good at upregulating. And so their work would be upregulated, and the things they're doing off duty are also upregulated. And the same thing that Ryan was talking about, right? The extreme sports, your other thing you do is another extreme sport or another thing that keeps you upregulated. So talk to me a bit about that, about what the importance of recognizing that it's okay to downregulate. You don't need to stay in a form of constant tension to stay viable, that you can downregulate. And then ironically so, you'll actually be better when you upregulate.
What comes up for me immediately is just alluding back to my transition out of policing and when my awareness changed, and I said, this version of myself I didn't believe could heal and be well if I re-injected myself back into that space. That awareness came in the first downregulated state I had experienced in probably 20-ish years. I went into the recovery program, and as I spoke to those foundational pieces, reestablishing this foundational version of myself. And what it was a downregulated version of myself going, oh my God, I don't know what this feeling is. This is, I can see, I can hear, I can observe, I can look back and reflect and go, oh my God, that was fucked up. It was necessary because I chose it. I chose it because I needed to, at least I felt like I needed to stay in that state to not visit myself. Once I became downregulated, it was this gift of I'm aware. I can look forward and look at the moment ahead of me and actually choose with intention, with clear vision of how I want to show up in this world. And as you said, it's important to be able to fluctuate 100%. We're going to need to react. We're going to need to have moments where that fighter inside of us shows up, presents itself to navigate a moment that's difficult. There's dozens in any given day. Someone cutting you off in traffic, you need your upregulated fight response to show up and hammer the fucking brakes of your vehicle. Like, that is your system doing what it's supposed to do, but being aware of it and having a semblance of control over it is a beautiful thing. And when we speak to some of the things we do in our experiences, these moments of discomfort, speaking to the cold plunge, for example, it's intentionally injecting yourself to an environment that's going to send you into an upregulated state. But then within that, we're supporting it in how to bring yourself down and bring yourself to a regulated state in that response. And that can translate into every part of your life. And that's why intentionally choosing uncomfortable moments or discomfort is so vital to creating a holistic version of ourselves, because if we actively participate in it by choice with intention, we can identify it immediately and we can say, oh, this is me going into a response. I can choose to stay there, or I can choose to that it's not necessary. It's not serving me in this moment, and I can just come down. I'm safe. I'm in a tub full of ice with 7 men staring at me. Yeah, for a second there, it's okay for that to show up, but hey, I'm safe. I'm good. I'm all right. You can take that into the world and say, this is just my system doing what it's supposed to do, but I have more control over it now.
That's a good example of using the cold plunge. And you were alluding to being in the car. And this is a really good way to practice this piece of going from an upregulated state and then getting back to grounded, because if we don't, we know we can lose control of our emotions and have very poor decisions in that moment. So example, you're driving down the 400 heading into Toronto from Collingwood and someone cuts you off. If we learn to take a breath before we react, we get ourselves out of a whole lot of trouble. So, someone cuts you off in traffic, take a breath and do your best not to retaliate, because it always ends up bad. But that's a decision. And this idea of coming back to breath in an upregulated state when we feel like we're going to spin out of control, when we're going to lose our temper, let's say with our kiddos or with a partner, take a breath. We have the control to show up better than we are sometimes. It's a great tool.
What are your thoughts on actually choosing things that cause you discomfort? Because it is more common now. Cold plunges are a thing. Really hard workouts are a thing. Rucking, the list could go on. I find it kind of interesting how there's some comfort in choosing and identifying and portraying quote unquote discomfort that you're putting yourself through. Whereas coming to sit with a group of men, and especially guys you don't know, and then, having some more deeper conversation, that could be very uncomfortable for guys. And they'll steer away from it. But even though they're promoting being the guy that does all the uncomfortable things, there's comfort in choosing the things you're choosing to be uncomfortable in. A cold plunge is physically uncomfortable. It can be mentally uncomfortable as well, but you're choosing that and you're still avoiding other things that would really, truly, deeply be uncomfortable for you. And maybe some of these practical things like a cold plunge, they're a gateway that could open yourself up to really getting to the meat of the uncomfortable things that you have to face. And then by doing that more and more, you get better and better at staring at and sitting with things that are really uncomfortable for you. You would build up your resilience and your ability to face those things. So how much are we choosing things that are to the outward world look uncomfortable? And maybe are initially, but how much is that so important to drive a wedge into that, to open up into things that are really uncomfortable that you need to deal with? I think that's where the real healing comes, right? This is the post-traumatic growth.
I can speak to that to start. I'll speak about myself and my daily practices, and Matt can speak to his in choosing things that are uncomfortable. A lot of healing there. It's interesting, I think about the cold plunge, for example, and walking out into the bay is one of the hardest ways to cold plunge because your shins are burning on the way out. Things are starting to tingle. Yeah, your brain just starts telling you, no, you should get the heck out of here. This is wrong. Again, now we're in an upregulated state as we're walking in. And then once we do some breath work to slow ourselves down and settle in, once we actually settle in and go through that experience, on the other side of that pain and discomfort is this lightness. There's this, I can do the hard stuff. Feel like a fucking superhero at the other side of doing a 5 to 10 minute cold plunge in the bay when it's freezing cold. And my other practice is the cold shower. So I've been taking cold showers for 5 years now through the pandemic as a way of leaning into discomfort. And the shower is actually, I would say, equally as uncomfortable as walking out into the bay. A cold plunge, I feel like you sink yourself into it and you can kind of get used to it. And the cold shower, for some, it's really hard to settle in. And everybody's experience is different. But other ways I find discomfort is in the wintertime, I'm out in the bay lake surfing with my partner, Brooke, and it's minus 15 and I've got icicles on my beard, but I'm using a wetsuit and booties and mitts. There's a mental game, though. It doesn't matter how protected you are, that you're going out in the water and it's a blizzard and the water's cold. All this fear can settle in. Again, I come back to breath. And once you get through to the other side of actually paddling out and going out and catching waves into shore, coming out the other side, again, there's this lightness and bliss and a stoke that's incredible because you've done something that's hard. That's some of my experience with leaning into uncomfortable pieces. And sauna, I could speak to sauna, but Matt, why don't you step in and share some of the uncomfort that you lean into and you choose to do?
So the man in the backyard, I just want to mention this real quick. We did create this container, which is short and sweet, so to say. There are definitely, some small injections of discomfort in the experience, whether it's the cold plunge and even the conversations, around fire. Oddly enough, even a 5-minute drop in breath work for someone who's not done it before can be a moment of discomfort. What is this? I don't do this. Essentially, it's anytime you disrupt someone's routine practice of how they navigate their day, you're going to inject some level of discomfort. But the man in the backyard was intentionally designed to be light, in the sense of it's sort of like a stepping stone into choosing something that is not your usual pattern of choosing. We also host these larger retreat experiences that are, 2-3 days that, are more intensive, so to say. They will have more, and I don't want to just keep using the word discomfort because it can be discouraging, but also it's going to challenge parts of yourself, all parts of yourself. We tend to, just alluding again back to your question, Scott, I'm sort of trending to use the vessel as that pathway to the discomfort, doing a really hard workout, getting into the cold water, climbing the tallest peak on the fucking planet. Now, those are also obviously psychologically challenging as well, but it's like we take our vessel and that's the thing that we want to challenge most. Now, what I think that people start to realize is that in those moments, different parts of them are showing up. oh man, like I have to be psychologically resilient to get through this. Like, yes, my legs are starting to get sore. Like, fuck, I'm not even halfway done this goddamn thing, and I got to keep going. So now you got to inject that. And you know what? The more you exhaust yourself, then emotional starts to come in and be like, oh man, I'm starting to feel this stuff. You know, why is that coming up? Oh, wow, that's serious. So your emotional part, and in all of it, you're having a spiritual experience, you know, which is, to me, a spiritual experience is like this all-encompassing parts of yourself having a moment of shift. I can have some of my most spiritual moments on a rock through the woods because I took my body into a place where I'm going to connect with nature. I get to 15K mark, I'm like, I'm exhausted. But I start to get these downloads. This is something that is being highlighted. It starts to come up. And those are the parts of myself that tend to get blocked as I navigate my day-to-day activities in a generic day in my life. Going into town, doing some work, to get blocked by being on my phone, sending emails. Like I'm not allowing myself the space to let all parts of myself come to the surface. And without going too far off on this tangent, these moments of discomfort are so much more than that. They're just presenting an opportunity for all parts of myself to open up, get cracked open, and let what needs to come through, what needs to be released, get released. I know we want to help other men in choosing that sort of stuff for themselves. And the Men in the Backyard is like a stepping stone. And Ryan can verify this. One of the most common responses we get from that space is, I didn't know this kind of thing existed. Like, I didn't know that was possible. And what they're saying is, I didn't know I could show up like that and still leave feeling like a man, you know, and feeling full and authentic and still like I didn't sell myself out in the experience.
When you have epiphanies, and you both alluded to them in your lives, and you recognize an old pattern, you can feel a lot of shame and guilt around how that pattern affected you and the people around you. Sometimes that's hard to deal with when you first start to feel that come up, so you can push it away and ignore it and just stay in the pattern you're in, versus trying to process that and see that in a different way, and seeing that moving forward and healing is actually going to be better for you. That might be a barrier for people as to not wanting to open up and shift their perspective.
I can find myself actually getting frustrated, not frustrated in this moment, but frustrated when I gave myself permission to stay stuck for a very long time. And there's still moments of shame and guilt that come up in self. You know, there's narratives that still come up, you know, oh my God, you wasted 20 years of your life in that very dark space. I needed that. I needed to experience that to then now be able to understand what it feels like to experience, call it the other side, levity and openness and being aware of the emotional part of myself. What comes up is if you're stuck, and it doesn't have to be the growth experience, but if you're stuck, the work is choosing something different. So if you're not going to choose coming into a Men in the Backyard experience, please choose something else. Just don't choose the thing that you continue to choose and then turn around and tell yourself that you're stuck and I hate this and I don't like how I'm living my life. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but that's what I want to inspire men to do, is to do the work in shifting themselves from that stuck position. Because being stuck it's not serving anyone. It's not serving yourself, and it's not serving those around you. It's not serving anyone to stay where you are if it is a space of autopilot, that existence that doesn't feel good. So you got to choose differently. Choosing differently is the first step to shifting yourself from that stuck position. Different conversations, uncomfortable moments, and you're going to come out of it going, oh, all right, it wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll try that again.
Ryan, maybe a good analogy for what I'm trying to say here as well is, if you're going to try and change how you eat, you don't need to throw everything out in your house and upend and start fresh, and then everything is changed in the next meal. Knocking it off a bit at a time is more beneficial. You stop eating one thing that's bad for you in your day, and you don't change everything else. And you just slowly adapt to your new way of being. And in that way, is it easier to process how you were and transition into something new in a way that is not as jarring, and it's too much to process all at once.
Got to get into our body to get out of this autopilot and this stuckness that both Matt and I have experienced in our lives. I'm sure you've experienced it too, Scott, that where to start on this journey of growth, or to get out of a state that you feel that is not serving you or anybody else around you is to go for a run. Or if you're not at the running stage, go for a walk out in the forest. Leave your phone at home and just go connect with nature. It's that easy to start something. Once you start something, then it makes it so much easier to try something else that's going to push you in your normal day-to-day. So movement is definitely something that helps men get out of their heads and get into their body. And usually what happens when we do that is those really big problems in our day, we can solve those by stepping away from it, go move our body, and then whatever that problem is, more than likely is going to show up after that workout. I talk about movement as a way of finding a little bit of clarity in your day or finding a bit of lightness, grounding, taking your shoes off and just go stand in the grass if you've got it close by is another way of just resetting when we're spinning with thoughts. It's very easy to get caught up in spinning, especially today. Like this week, the energy was very forensic, is what I felt. Our neighbors in the South gone through another election, and we have a lot of family and friends who are very invested in American politics emotionally, and I choose not to get on that board, but I'm a feeling type of man where I can feel this forensic energy that I'm trying to navigate my week is a lot of outdoor time. When it's sunny, get out in the sunshine, move my body, get out and go for walks, go out and play basketball, get on my bike. Anything I can do to move that weird forensic energy also supports the beginning of shifting out of autopilot. And we know what autopilot is. It's if we're struggling with our consumption, if we're struggling with a video game addiction or something that is not sitting well with us. Growth is not biting off a huge, big piece of the pie. Growth is taking one step at a time, one day at a time. And I think that Matt said it very well, that through the growth experience, we're trying to inspire men to take that first step and come and be part of a day that you'll connect with men, eat delicious food, play some games, do some cold plunging, have a sauna. These are all part of our day. And it's a good stepping stone. And I invite those who are sitting on the fence going, well, I don't know if this is for me. I'm not into those things. Well, I invite you to come and try it out. You have nothing to lose.
Being conscious of your time, and I know, Matt, you've got somewhere to be to around 2. So as we wrap up, maybe a good place to segue off what you're talking about and end on is giving each other and giving ourselves some grace, right? To realize that it's a process, to realize that every day doesn't need to be a maximum growth day, that if it's even just a thought in your day, at least the thought is still there, that there's something, that there's some hope to stay on the path. And it's not about having to radically shift and do everything perfect in every day from that moment moving forward. So what does it mean for you guys to give yourselves grace and be good to yourselves as you're learning and growing?
One thing I ask myself regularly is how I'm choosing making me a better human. Will I have moments that I choose something that may hurt somebody, may present a difficult moment for me and someone else? Absolutely. But if my intention behind it was to improve myself and show up as the best version of myself, so then those I love and those I surround myself with and those I choose also benefit from an elevated version. That's the grace I give myself. I came at it with an intention to show up as the best version of myself. And sometimes that's pretty ugly and gnarly, but it's also, I'm trying. I want to show up whole and authentic and true. And I think as long as I keep myself in the parameters of that, I'm good. I'm giving myself the grace. I'm giving myself the permission to just show up and step into each day and each moment.
And I guess sometimes the idea that if it took you 20 years to get where you're at, it's going to take some time to shift that into a new dynamic.
Yeah, without getting into the neuroscience of how our brain works in respect to patterns and behaviors and all that, absolutely. I spent most of my adult life navigating my life in a certain way, and I choose very differently now, but I got to give myself the grace to make mistakes and have moments that are part of that rewiring. But as I alluded to earlier, there's an awareness now rather than just that autopilot, let the steam engine keep trucking through.
Yeah, one of the biggest things to accepting your imperfection is accepting that trying to be better is going to be imperfect too.
Yeah, absolutely. The concept of post-traumatic growth, that's what sits in there is grace. Grace that, hey, I experienced the world in this way. That doesn't have to define me. This is now an experience that is part of multitude of experiences that I've had, good, bad, and all the in between. But the growth that can come from that is giving yourself the permission to be okay with it all. And it was all necessary and all part of my story and part of me becoming who I am today. I would never be who I am today speaking to you about any of this had I not experienced some of the very dark moments of the first 25 years of my life. I don't know who I would be. To be honest, the one question my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time, when I went down into the driveway down into the treatment center, when I first began this shift of self, she said, well, how are you feeling? And I said, I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified because I don't know who I am on the other side of this, because I lived within the constraints of this person that I was. But I was ready. I was ready, and I was ready to accept it all as part of who I am, and excited within that fear to become who I was going to be next.
So before we sign everything off, do you want to talk a bit about the Forge?
Yeah, that'd be great. Go for it, Matt.
Well, as we discussed, creating these different containers to bring men into opening up into their, a healthy masculine energy and how they show up for each other in community. One of the evolutions from this experience of presenting these men in the backyard events was a more structured container, which is 8 weeks long. We've named it the Forge. The Forge, and the idea of building this bond and cultivating this collective energy that this group of men bring to the 8-week experience. So we gather at my place in Thornbury in the backyard, where the Men in the Backyard series sort of evolved from. Every Thursday evening, we have a theme for the night that leans into an aspect of showing up in the world in that healthy masculine energy. We reflect, and then we throw on a weighted ruck. We go for a 45 to an hour long ruck. We come back to the fire. Ryan Knight, a member of this growth experience community, supports us in breathwork, or sometimes a meditative breathwork, to sort of ground ourselves back into sharing what came up around the theme of the week. What we found in our experience of men's groups is usually it's about an hour, and it just sometimes doesn't feel like there was enough space to have everyone sort of dive into something from that thematic standpoint and what comes up for them. It just seems to open and close so quickly. It doesn't really hold the space that we thought was necessary for a depth connection, on a weekly basis. And then we add that movement into it. The ruck is from our lived experience in different forms of movement. It kind of cracks you open just that extra little layer by being able to activate that movement together, and then coming back to the fire after the movement just seems everyone's a little more light, a little more open to sharing what comes up. So that's sort of where that birthed and evolved.
Ryan, would you add anything?
The only thing I can add is that we do a silent ruck at times as well. And that's really nice because there's a prompt before you leave the fire, something to contemplate. For example, what is it to be a modern man today? That was a prompt that Matt came up with, and everybody had a chance to kind of contemplate that and come back to the fire. And then we share what comes up in that moment for us. And as Matt said, when you do the ruck and you prompted with something that you contemplate, it's really incredible what comes up, because you're not just thinking about that prompt. There's other pieces maybe that you're working through in your own life that comes up. And we don't get a lot of time, or we don't take a lot of time for ourselves to have complete silence. It's a podcast that we put in our ears and we go for a walk or a run or a bike ride. But this is a great way just to be and move.
It's awesome.
I do want to add one other thing. The idea is, and again, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, another layer of wanting to create this sort of structured formula that does have potential to evolve, not a rigid structure, but a structure. Currently, I have this one that I'm facilitating in Thornbury, but the idea is that Ryan and Nathan, whether it's collectively in Tiny or in Collingwood, Wabashine, something that can be transplanted into different communities and be created elsewhere. That idea of like sort of mingling almost like courseware with a gathering group, being guided with some of that structure. So Ryan can start one in Collingwood, and then we have these different micro communities that then we create on a quarterly or 2 to 3 times a year. All the groups come together, and we have this, massive community gathering of people who've experienced the Ford.
Nice. How can people reach out to you and find out more about all this?
Matt's handle, which is the Growth Experience Matt. And then my handle is the Growth Experience Ryan. And we have thegrowthexperience.com.
Our email, Matt at thegrowthexperience.com, Ryan at thegrowthexperience.com. Those can be used to connect with us as well.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this.
I do want to say, and I know, Ryan, you're going to have your own words around this, so I can't say how thankful and grateful we are, Scott, for you taking the time to host us and give us this opportunity to present ourselves to your vast community. I'll use those words for now, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you for being a leader in this community of growth. You've been a big inspiration for me for a long time as a podcast host, but also to have a platform where we can share our story about growth is really a gift. So we're very grateful. Thank you.